Hi, my name is Craig Johnson, and I'm welcome to virtual Longmire Days. It's a little bit of an oxymoron like that because I can't think of anybody who would be less technologically advanced and more likely to be able to do Zoom conferences, cell phones, and computers than Walt Longmire like that. But fortunately, he's got friends in the business who can help him out with these type of things like that. And this is one of our very first events. Like that, it's called Talking Books. And I am really excited and really happy and pleased to welcome my agent and good friend, Gail Hochman, to our very first virtual Longmire Days. Hello, Gail. How are you?
Hi, honey. Pretty good. One thing I'm happy, I'm a bad flyer. So I'm not, but I wish I were there.
Oh.
There. But I'm sitting home in Brooklyn. Not in quarantine anymore, but happier to be inside because outside you're wearing a mask all the time. And life is a little bit boring without the actual live Longmire Days.
It is. Yeah. And generally here in Wyoming, when people wear masks, generally they're trying to rob a train or a bank or something like that. So
yeah. It's quite a time. It's a time to remember. I wonder what Walt would do. What would Walt do?
It is. One of the things I'm really excited about is that this actually gives us an opportunity to do something that we probably should have been doing for the past 10 years. I keep getting all of the emails from people like that say, I'm just so glad you're doing this because, I have relatives who I have to take care of, or I have children, or I have a financial situation where I'm not able to make it, to Buffalo, Wyoming, AKA Durant. And so this is a really wonderful opportunity for me like that. And so this is a challenge, no doubt about that like that, but nonetheless, it's I think going to be a wonderful addition to Longmire Days, not only this year, but also for next year and for years to come.
Hope so.
Now our program today is called Talking Books, which I kind of had to laugh a little bit about like that, because one of the things that they used to, whenever Remington like that was doing his drawings, up in Montana, he would show them to the Crow and the Cheyenne and all of them, and they would refer to his drawings as the talking paper. And that's almost the way that I look at the books in many ways, is almost like a talking paper like that. But I also have to be honest and tell everybody here like that there would be no talking paper and there would be no Walt Longmire if it was not for Gail Hochman, who at one point in time in the middle, I think it was in January, allowed this, cowboy to come in and drop this manuscript on her desk that was about the size of a Sears Wish book, as I recall. It was like about 600 pages, that first draft of the Cold Dish. Like, and I made the mistake. I think that a lot of beginning authors think that, well, maybe it wasn't a mistake, that, boy, this is the only chance I'm going to get. And if I get this book published, it'll be the only book I ever get published in my entire life. So I'm putting everything in this.
I have never met anybody that way. But you do put everything into your first novel.
You do.
And you do. You have to. You put your heart and soul, since you have no idea of your future. And in my experience in general, the first novel just has such vitality. And in my experience, for us to be on, what are we on, 16 or something?
Yeah.
How on earth do you keep the vitality in all of those books? It's extraordinary. So the first, I used to say, and I was a slim little thing at that time, Craig would come into my office, pick me up, and swing me around. Now, I'm not a good flyer. I'm not a good swinger. I mean, it was really hilarious. And I had a policy: I will never take in a manuscript that was more than half my weight. Little slip of a thing once, and half my weight. This was more than half my weight. But what you do to be polite, you start reading because it was recommended by this person and he was doing somebody a favor and he gave it to me. And I thought, well, I'll take that guy's recommendation with a grain of salt, but why not? And how could you put down Walt Longmire? Girls love Walt Longmire. I fell in love with Walt Longmire. So I always read with a pen. You see, I'm sitting here with a pen. So I read the manuscript, and either on the manuscript, I don't remember if I wrote it on the manuscript or I wrote a letter that was like an intimidating, many pages, single spaced. On page this, you do that. Inconsistency, things that didn't flow. This character was great. The story was amazing. Just get rid of all the stuff that we don't need there. And to me, it was easy because I also read this and I knew that here we go. Michelangelo has returned. underneath all of the extra stuff that made 600 pages. And it wasn't bad stuff. We just didn't need it. There was the heart and soul of a great character and an amazing story. So now many agents don't do that. They read, they put it on their, I read it and I'm going to reject it pile. You know, but I read it and I really, 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 really liked it. And then I thought, okay, if you can do the revision, great. And if you can't, ciao, you know, ciao, aloha. But it came in amazing. And then we sent it out and we sold it. Usually it takes round after round. It was an auspicious beginning, and it continues. And we're not even auspicious. I don't think we've arrived, because I still think we have miles more to go and to achieve here, right? But Absolutely. It was quite exciting. Anyway, that was a big answer to your simple.
I'm used to big answers. I'm used to big answers from you, Gail. I count on big answers for you.
Yeah. Okay.
But I'm going to make you backtrack. I'm going to take you back to my first question, which is like, how did a nice girl like you end up in a sordid business, like, you know, being an agent in the publishing industry? How did that possibly happen to you?
Okay. Now, my answer to that is sordid is as sordid does. I was a nice young girl out of college. What did I study? Neuroanatomy and neurophysiology and Italian. And how the hell did I get a job in publishing? I wasn't good enough like to be a translator. And I thought I would go to be a doctor, but I really hated the lab courses. So I thought, that's not good. You know, like, I'm not sure I would be so trustworthy if I hate the lab course. It doesn't translate well. So I got a job in a publishing house, typing letters. At the time, my first job was typing letters for a guy who didn't do anything. I mean, so the whole job was a nothing, but I stayed there 2 years. I got a different job within the company, working for one of the original Saturday Night Live cast members' father, who was as nutty as the cast member. So that was kind of a crazy experience. And then after a couple of years, a new person came in to run the department, and all of the kids knew we would never get promoted, so we had to go looking. At the time, I was shy. I tell you that and you laugh in my face. I was so shy. And one of my mentors in the world of publishing had an agent who was looking for a younger agent call me to interview me. All right, so I go for this interview. And I think the first thing I said was, you know, I don't want this job. I'm shy, remember? How did I say this? I don't want this job because agents are kind of idiots. So you call it sordid. And I said to the guy, agents are idiots. He said, what are you talking about? Well, you could get so much more for your clients if you asked these things like this and this and this and this and this. And the guy's listening to me. No matter what he pays me, it's worth it. Because I had come from a publishing house and I knew a lot of little things that on regular deals they could get, or regular publishing processes. They were easy things. So he hired me. And I walked into this, and okay, so you're talking sordid. This was the first American literary agency. It was as stodgy could be, period. You can't imagine it. So I worked there, 6 years. And then I thought, okay, I'm the company mascot. Because by then I wasn't so shy. I was like cute young thing. I didn't want to be a company mascot. And another guy was, through another friend, was looking to hire an agent. And he was another old family firm. And he said, I don't want an employee, I want a partner. And I thought, well, that's a big statement. Nobody says that, because they make you sweat if you want to become a partner. So I went in there, a couple of things did unbelievably well a few years later. And I said, okay, Carl, you got to give me a raise. Just give me $10,000. Oh, let's have a drink. No. Don't buy me a drink. I don't want your drink. I want $10,000. Just give me $10,000. I've earned it. I brought all this money. I wasn't on commission. And we go for a drink and he makes me a partner. And over the years, it built up to be 50%, and then overnight, 100%. And it was a great transition. So we put my name on the door. And so I'm still a nice girl, and I managed not to have a sordid business. So, I mean, would you have liked me as an agent if I was a sordid agent?
I like you a little sordid myself. Okay, but that's just my take on that.
I promise to work. I promise to work.
Well, now here you are, like that. You're one of the most prestigious agents and the president of the Agents Union in New York, for goodness sake. Like, I mean, I'll be honest with you. If I'd known how high you were on the list, I probably wouldn't have had the nerve to come knock on your door like that, and go in and talk to you like that. But then you do have a unique situation where, I mean, I guess, for a lot of people, I get questions from a lot of would-be writers. And the first thing they always ask is, how do I get an editor? How do I get a publisher? And I'm like, well, first off, like you're going to have to go out and you're going to have to find yourself an agent like that, because no, big publishers, take on any kind of like unsolicited manuscripts or anything like that. So I guess with the situation that you have and your knowledge, like of what exactly this position is, what would you say that an agent's job is, in layman's terms, getting that information out to people who may not understand the ins and outs of the business?
Okay. I tried to think of how to answer that, not in the boring, straightforward called Poets and Writers you could read to learn about this sort of thing. There's all kinds of books that people have written about agents, what they do, so that you can get factually. This is how I would say it. It's a little bit more emotionally driven, but this is what I do. First, I get manuscripts. Let's say I like it. Let's say I like it a lot and I want to work with the guy and we shake hands. My first job is I have to get the best stuff out of this guy. I got to get the best text. Rarely do you have a book that comes in and it's so perfect and wonderful that you would just send it out. And sometimes it happens. That's magic. But first, I want to feel like we have done the best we can do. Then I have to think, okay, what are the right editors and publishers? So my next job is, when I submit it, to submit them to the kind of people who would be great publishers for him. So my second job is to actually set up a writer with a great editor and a great publisher. I need a publisher that wants to invest in the writer. Some agents would say, oh yes, they have to invest by paying the most money. Well, sometimes, but I want them to invest their energy. I want all their departments to care passionately. I want them to invest their time and their dedication and their long-term vision for that author. If it turns out it was a bad place for us, it wasn't as good as we thought, we might move. But I'm ideally looking for a publisher that wants this guy to be important on their list. Some little books, I can't get that, but that's ideally what I want. Then I want to work with everyone to minimize the problem. You can imagine. We all think all the time about the best case scenario, how can we get there? And the worst case scenario and the little problems, and how can we avoid them? So I'm dealing with the boss, I'm dealing with the editor, I'm dealing with sometimes I'll even call the head of sales department. They never talk to agents, but there's a reason. I don't have that much prestige. I'll explain that in a sec. I want to increase the success. I want to reduce the problems. And I want the client to feel comfortable. And I want the client to say out loud to me what's on their mind, so I can answer their question or fix it. In the long term, we want to build a readership book by book in the US and abroad. If we can sell film or TV, that's part of the process. That would be great. So of course we want to make the money so he can actually write instead of, having to be an insurance clerk at night. We want to get him fans and readers, and we want his name to be more and more and more known. In your case, you worked so amazingly on your own to drive that relationship between you and the audience. See, I can't do that. You did that, and nobody told you to do that. So my job also is to see what the actual extra talents of a writer might be, and to see what the fears. I have some Emily Dickinson type clients who look like can barely show their face. So I'm supposed to draw the best out of you and grow your public. So, I mean, that's not a nutshell. It's a huge job, but that's how I would say it.
Okay. And then I guess, but that leads to the next question, of course, like that, which I know the answer is going to be a positive answer like that, but I guess, if you can explain a little bit like that. I mean, what I'm always saying is that, it's amazing whenever you get a publisher who actually reads the manuscripts and you get an agent who actually reads the manuscripts. It seems like, there are an awful lot of people out there like that. They hear the idea and then they make a decision right then, yes or no. And it seems to me that you delve a little further. You take more chances like that on maybe material that might not be, whatever, the divorcee who's writing a novel on New England beach like that that's going to be in the New Yorker or whatever. You tend to go out a little bit further like that and try and do something a little bit different, maybe reach out into some areas like that, both geographically and culturally that, a lot of people don't look at. And I guess my question is, how do you make the choices about those manuscripts that you decide you're going to read?
Oh, the manuscripts I decide I'm going to read. Well, let's just, okay. We get query letters. That's your first step as a writer. You send out a query letter. Will you read my manuscript? It's about this and this. I do that and that for a living. If there's anything, I am a sucker. When I was a younger person, a younger agent in that first stodgy job, I would say yes to a lot because did I have the time? No, we read 100% on our own time. That's what the writer should know. So if I feel the writer can't even write a letter, I don't want to read that. I mean, why? I have no time. If the letter is intriguing and they have an intriguing background, I might want to read it. If it's an idea, like certain subjects are really hard to sell. Certain genres have become hard to sell. Now, on the pandemic, we're all working harder. I'm not quite sure why. The publishers are definitely buying, but they're buying a lot less. We are all reading, but we have to make a decision fast in the manuscript most of the time. I have now on my iPad like 30 or 35 manuscripts, and a half a dozen are from sort of new clients. I may not have sold their stuff, but I'm committed to them, so I have to read it, plus 20 or 30 others. How the hell am I going to read that stuff? So if you've sent your best work, you give yourself a better chance. I start reading. If I fall asleep repeatedly, that's a bad sign. If the thing is badly written or it's redundant or it's not my taste. I had an editor friend who said to me, Gail, and in the olden days, I read the whole book all the time. Are you really reading the whole book? And I said, well, of course I am. And then I write a long note to everybody. And he said, I read as much as I need to read to know if I can do this book. If it persuades me, if I'm engrossed in it, if I'm hooked into it, if I'm turning the pages. But when I get to the point where I know I can't publish it well, I will have to write a nice rejection. So my question always is, well, or your question, writer's question, what happens if the action starts on page 150 and it gets exciting? And Craig, what is your answer to that?
Then you better start on page 150.
You better start the novel on page 150. So how do you decide? If it's, the best student of some writer you like, a lot of my clients teach, they send me stuff. A lot of outside writers I meet in the world, I'll tell you, I'm not prestigious in the way you're thinking. The reason I'm prestigious is that I'm kind and I'm honest. And the publishers respect me. They don't respect me like on a pedestal. They know that when they talk to me, I'm honest. If I call them with a problem, we have to solve this problem. Help me. They're going to go very far for me because they trust me. Why do they trust me? Because I have a sense of what obstacles they are up against. And it's a little manipulative, I have to admit. They don't want to give me this thing I want for this reason and that reason. It's absolutely off the table. They're not going to give it. So I don't go in there saying, you got to give me this thing. I go in there saying, you know what? I'm going to ask you for something that you don't want to do. We got to talk about it. The client feels blah, blah, blah. I think it's right for blah, blah reasons. Please think about it. Don't answer me today. Call me tomorrow. I have to tell you 95% of the time, I get something like that they don't want to do.
That's amazing.
So that's amazing. So it's prestigious because I'm honest and they can trust me. The powerful agents at the very big corporations swagger around. They expect everything to give them everything. They're unbelievably driven by power, and I'm driven by the character and the voice on the page. So you make a decision but the point is I'm sitting here with so many things I'm supposed to read, and I start this and I start that, and then 3 guys call me and send me stuff, and then a client that's important sends me stuff. It's very hard. I do have a very good reader now, so when I get stuff that is just unsolicited, I don't know who the person is, they send it with 20 pages, or I may give it to her just to screen. And, many people have assistants who screen, and I never did. Now I have this helper because otherwise I have no social life, Craig.
Well, not there in New York. You have a wonderful social life when you come here to Wyoming, though.
I know. In Wyoming, you sit down in the saloon and somebody's playing the guitar, and you say to the person at the chair next to you, oh, are you here for Longmire Days? Who are you? Where are you from? And you learn about, it's the most amazing experience. And you get your beer. I mean, it's really, couldn't be more perfect.
And it doesn't cost $20 either. Like
It doesn't cost $20, and the music is, I have so many videos year after year of the music and people dancing, and it's just the most wonderful. Anyway, but then
a
I
lot of
tell
the
them,
credit for that, I have to admit, goes to Dave Stewart, like at the
oh,
owner and
I
operator,
miss Dave
and,
Stewart.
and chief musician down there at the Occidental, who does such an absolutely magnificent job. Anyway, I'll talk about
Okay.
Dave at another other point. Like, when you read a manuscript, what is it that I remember that was kind of interesting, like, because I remember when our good friend, like at Catherine Court, who at that point in time was president of Penguin, picked me up as an editor with Viking. Like, I remember asking her, I remember saying to her, why in the world are you doing this? Why in the world are you even remotely thinking, of this book, The Cold Dish, like that? And then more importantly, I guess later on when she started talking about doing it as a series, like, and I remember the big statement that she made was one that you did too, like it was, when I said, what are you looking for? What are you trying to find, like that, in an author? And I remember her statement, and your statement also, was a voice. Looking for a particular voice, again, something that's going to be different from all of the things that you've read before. And I'd like to know.
It's not like we're looking for a predetermined particular voice.
Mm-hmm.
We're not sitting there. Well, sometimes you say, oh, nobody ever wrote a book about a Hawaiian massage artist. I mean, I don't know what from that voice. We don't go into the world like that. But when this is the experience. You start reading. Hopefully we don't drive through a cornfield for the first 40 pages, observing the height of the corn. You start our character rises off the page because the voice, either it's first person and the voice drives the book of that character, or it's about the character in a third person narrative that somehow it's his intimate narrative or her intimate. That character literally rises off the page. And when you see it, you know it. So that's why you want to read a bunch of these manuscripts. In this case, it's a mystery. So if you wanted to say, well, what is it? There's nothing freakish about the West. The West is a wonderful place. I think it's a terrible, small-minded thing if editors and agents living in, now there's agents and editors everywhere, but 80% of our business was in New York City. We knew nothing about these other places. What, but there's nobody who buys books in these places? There's no other worlds and cultures that are interesting? I may never travel to this or this place. I might read, not a travel guide, I'm going to read a novel by a person who's a native of that place, or a person who's absorbed that place.
Mm-hmm.
And I want something to rise off the page. And in the case of Longmire, it was a very satisfying story. So for a mystery reader, we just had a good story. A mystery is made up of a main character with a shtick. That's what we say. I'm sorry. And in this case, a formula novel would be made up of a main character. I have a series about where the detective is a former dog trainer, I swear to you, and she would use the dogs to help solve the crimes. She would say, whatever the dog's name was, go, Spot, open the door. And Spot would jump up and get the doorknob in his mouth and open the door. Okay, that's the shtick, right? That's pretty funny. In this case, what was different about this one, so why do I care so much about this one? Each novel stands alone as a fully vibrant, amazingly written, fully realized novel. It's not just a story with a character with a shtick and a funny, like a shtick kind of a voice. It's a deep voice. It's a deep experience of this character and his experience of his world and his case that he's solving is full. It's resplendent. There's a big difference in the texture of the fabric here than the texture of the fabric in a category mystery. So we like the story, otherwise we wouldn't have been able to do anything. But the texture, which is the prose, it's not this one style that we like. We always look for that one style. It's that you brought this world alive in so many facets. Now you're going to have a swelled head and there'll be no living with you.
No. I've got a wife, and so she keeps me on the straight and narrow as far as that type of thing is concerned. What's the biggest mistakes also? I mean, to go back a little bit far as whenever you get manuscripts in, from other authors and everything, what's some of the biggest mistakes that you see from potential authors? What are the biggest problems that you see whenever they put something in?
Number one, Every writer thinks, oh, I have contact with this agent. I better send her something now. She'll forget me. Number one, by the time I got home to my house, I probably forgot you anyway because my life is so piled up. Not to be rude, but the important thing is send in your best work, period. Sit on it. I always say put it in a closet for a couple of weeks. Read it again. Try to put it away. Try to read it as if you were an outsider. Check your spelling. Check your diction. Check your grammar. Something with bad grammar, I have no patience for. A word here or there. Apostrophe, IT apostrophe S. Okay, I'll correct that. No big deal. But if it's sloppy, if it feels like it's from some high school C- student, it's not there. And the second thing is, well, I thought about this. Arrogance. We hate arrogance. Your book had to be the best thing the world has ever seen, because I'm working hard for you, and I don't want your attitude. Sorry. And the third thing is, people will say, oh, it's great, oh, it's not great, or fix this, change this. I think over time you'll learn who to trust. You'll learn how to take in editorial advice from your book, your reading group if you have it, your mother-in-law who always read mysteries, so she knows all about mysteries, your professor if you're a writer, your friend who's a writer and published. You'll learn how to take in what they say. I think you need to trust sometimes what outside people say, but you need to learn who you can trust, and there's no easy answers for that. But realize, I am giving to you my full weekend. Sometimes I might take a day off or a half a day. I might have a dinner party. Well, not now, but I'm giving you my whole weekend. I don't want to read 3 drafts if it's sloppy. If it's really good like yours was, then I'm going to go through that process and it's going to come back. Don't send it back to me in 3 days. I just finished reading. Well, yours was a big decision. Sometimes it's, it just ends flat. We got to do something at the end. We got to build up more. It has to be a better ending. If you just tack something on, that's not the answer. So don't send it right back in 3 minutes, because you have to remember, always in this business, you get more if you put yourself in the other guy's shoes.
Agreed. I always tell people like that whenever they're wanting to send me manuscripts to read. The first thing I always tell them is, you're sending your work to another author. That's really not the best place to try and submit your work. I mean, generally what you need to do is find somebody who's in the publishing industry or an agent or something like that. Just sending it to another author, really I've had people try and send me, an 800-page science fiction novel, or, a romance novel or something. And I'll say, I'm sure that there are readers out there for this, but it's not really particularly what it is that I write, and what I'm involved with. And so maybe you should think about, working on this a little bit. But the thing I always tell them is make sure it's absolutely the very best version of whatever it is that you're sending in. Make sure that it's absolutely as sharp as it can possibly be. Like, don't be sending something off and then 2 days later writing a poor agent or publisher or whoever and telling them, no, wait, don't read that one. I've got another one that I want to send to
God,
you.
Yeah.
Those are pretty horrifying. One thing that you've actually already kind of covered a little bit was, but the question that I had was like, do you have certain tests that you kind of like give, whenever you respond to an author and say, okay, what are some of the things? You kind of touched on those a little bit already like that, but I'd like to hear those again like that, because I remember one of the things that you came back with mine was, you gave me like a very structured response, and said, okay, this needs to be done, this needs to be done, this needs to be fixed, you need to think about this, go through and do all of these things like that. And so, I remember taking like, a couple of months like that to really work through the manuscript again and try and fix those problems. Obviously, that's one of the things that you do, is looking at it to see if somebody has, I guess, the flexibility, to be able to look at their own work and see if there's something that they can do, look at to make it, more viable as a commodity, I guess.
Yeah. Well, we don't call them tests, but it's, let's say, a process. My feeling is everything in the world is a process, right? Today you're on the bestseller list. Today got the best review of all time. Tomorrow, the Wall Street Journal may be nasty, but the next day you're going to get nominated for some award. So there's a flow in everything. Every time somebody sends me a manuscript and I write back to them with an editorial note, that doesn't mean they're my client. That means there's something about their book that was worth my not just writing. I'm sorry, it's not for me because I'm not particular. I didn't get drawn into the characters. I'm not particularly conversant in, I don't know, social life in Romania, or I'm not a romance or science fiction editor. So let's say I care enough to read the thing. Sometimes I send a 750 page book. I have one client who years ago wrote a novel, then short stories, and we had a lot of stories, but then he disappeared. Out of nowhere, the guy comes back with a novel that was 1,050 pages. So that was the first test, 1,050 pages. He didn't have a great track record of sales. He wasn't going to get one. Nobody's going to even read it. Now, in the days when editors would print everything, they're definitely not reading 1,000 pages. These days, you hardly know how long it is because it comes on, you know what I mean? It comes as a Word doc. And nobody really,
yeah.
you know. So that was the first test. I said to him, I'm not even going to read this. You're going to cut it down at least by 40%, at least. So that was test one, and he did it. Then he cuts it down, and I read it. And this guy's quite a beautiful writer, and it was a very cool story about a world that did come alive. You didn't know anything about this world. There was no real interest for you to be interested in it. So he had to make you interested. So he had to draw you in. He had to hold you in the palm of his hand. So I'm reading it. I'm thinking, it's still too long. Why does it feel it's lagging? And I realized in his case, and different books might have a different reason that it's not working, he repeated himself, but he didn't say the dog walked across the road and the next paragraph the dog walked across. He wrote one paragraph to describe the dog walking across the road. The next paragraph was from some other angle. He didn't use any of the words, but he wanted to make sure you got it. The dog walked across the road. It was very hot. He just missed the car. He wrote the same thing again. Everything was stretched out because he overstated everything. Mm-hmm. So I actually then, I can't remember if I read that 650 pages. I probably did. I edited 50 or 100 pages. I crossed off things. I didn't just say, try to fix this. It's a little redundant. I did it. And I sent that back to him. Really, this was a test. And I said, you've got to do this throughout the book. It is so redundant. You repeat without realizing it. I was very kind, but I wrote it on the manuscript and I scanned it to him. And he did bring it down to like 450 pages, which was good. I couldn't sell that book because it was the whole book just didn't move people. But that was a sequence of tests. Can we work together well? Mm-hmm. And I don't test it's not a test, but if the person didn't do anything or kept on putting it back in my court, I gotta love that guy in that book a lot. Because I have, why would I? And I don't want you to kowtow to me because I'm so powerful. I'm not powerful. I'm just one lousy reader. If I'm a good reader for you, as I said before, if you're trusting what I'm saying, oh God, she's right. The action starts there. We ought to just have the first scene be when the guy bursts in the house and so happens. And the other stuff I'll weave in. Oh my God, she's right. When you realize you can trust me, then actually please trust me. And if you don't like a suggestion, please talk to me. So it's not a test. It's just if you develop a relationship working in the right direction for that book. And, it could be different things for different books. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that's one of the key elements there is that you're a very hands-on agent. Mm-hmm. Like that. I think that I've heard stories from other authors like that say, like I maybe get an email once a year, from my agent. I hear from them, hardly at all like that, and one of the great joys of my life. Like, and I mean, you were talking and complimenting me on the fact that I have a very close relationship with readers like that. I don't have any business partners. I've got friends that I work with like that. And to me, that's kind of a very important, part of the process. The fact that you and I have a very open relationship and we'll write each other or talk to each other just when there's nothing really to say or anything. We just want to stay in touch and see how things are going.
I always have something to say. So this is an interesting question. Years ago, I went to visit one of my clients who was in Charlottesville, and we were very good friends. He was a very hot young writer in those days. He was just growing. And we had got letters. There was no such thing as email. So he got a letter from a person who was so disappointed that her story wasn't accepted by so-and-so magazine. And he's associated with that magazine. So she was yelling at him in the letter. And I said, you got to be kidding. Why would she think that? She sends it, and she sends it out again, and she sends it to the next place. And you have to do your job and decide on what you think you could use in the magazine. And he said, don't you understand? A writer always sends things out assuming it will be bought. So that was an interesting thing. So I learned something. Now that same weekend, that writer said to me, Gail, you're so formal. I mean, he was the kind of guy who, if you let him, I think he'd walk around like with no clothes on. He was such a character. He would do it, like really strange. So I'm thinking, formal? I mean, I'm just not going to do what you do. I'm not for. And he said, I want you to be my friend. And I was very much his friend. But I had to say the truth, which is, you don't pay me to be your friend. If I'm your friend, my reaction to your stuff is different. My reaction to the world we live in, publishing world, is different. If I'm your friend, I'm always telling you how great you are. And I do think you're great. So I can be your agent and I can be your friend, but it's not like your friend that you borrow a cup of sugar from next door who you gossip about everything. It's a little different. But it would break my heart if I weren't a friend to many, not all writers, my writers, but, and I found over time that if I spend a little actual time with somebody, not just a phone call or not just an email, I feel such a stake in them, even more than I did. I'm not sitting around thinking, oh, my percentage money is this much, I have a stake in him. I'm thinking, this matters to me. I mean, it's like a religion. It really matters. So Longmire Days matters. Seeing you guys once a year and sometimes more matters. It's funny.
No.
I mean, it's a funny, weird thing, but that's how I feel.
So that kind of leads into my next question, like that, which is, and I'm kind of glad that I'm wearing this hat like that while I'm doing this interview, I have to say, quite honestly. But you have a number of Western writers as clients. And
Yes.
I guess, our good friend Dan O'Brien, right across the border over here in South Dakota, and a number of others like that. I guess one of my questions would be like that, what is it with you in the West, Gail Hochman? What is it?
Well, first of all, my office that I now own was run for years by a guy named Carl Brandt, who loved going out west. He loved hiking and camping, and he would be gone in the wilderness for days. Then he got his leg, some problem with his leg, so he couldn't do that. But he, over the years, assembled a lot of extraordinary Western writers, like I represent, and he died like 5 or 6 years ago. So I represent Terry Tempest Williams from him, which is quite amazing. But myself, over the years, I represent Ron Carlson, who's a Western. Dan came to me 100 years ago. Dan O'Brien is a Buffalo rancher who was writing fiction and nonfiction. He came to me through some New York editor friends, and we hit it off like a house on fire. And the first year, what he said to me was, you wrote me a birthday card on my birthday. I think his birthday is like my father's birthday. It wasn't so hard to remember. You wrote me a birthday card. You called to say happy birthday. I have never had an agent who did that. And that's a stupid reason to take on an agent, but it mattered. And I think all novels do not take place in New York City and Chicago and LA, and we had a history of Western in my office. When I was a kid, I went on a camping trip with a huge bus of other kids the summer before Woodstock, believe it or not. We camped out all across the West. So in my professional life, I think a client was doing an event in Houston. Now, to you guys, Houston may not be the West, but they all wear cowboy boots, and cowboy hats. I had to buy cowboy boots. Those cowboy boots were so loved and so worn. So the next time I went to Houston, I bought more cowboy boots. I may have 3 stunning pairs of, and then I started going to Austin for the book festival in Austin. I love these nice corners. Austin was fabulous. I got a lot of cowboy boots. I love it. Then I live in Brooklyn. I'm a nice Jewish girl from Brooklyn. I look like a complete moron in my cowboy boots.
No,
I
no.
do. So I line up a boot, and then I got a problem with the pinched nerve, so I cannot wear even those heels.
Oh.
So I haven't, so the point is that there was a heritage in my office. It's a universe. How could you not love a story that takes place under the open sky and you feel it, you feel the place? How could you say that place isn't stunning and memorable and desirable? It really is. And then Walt walked in. When Walt walked across the pages, I nearly fainted from like a romantic impulse. No, and so do you see, it's a heritage in my office, and it's just an acquired taste that I completely love. And I'm so proud of it.
And you should be. You should be. I'm always saying that Walt has a very small number of godmothers who are responsible, fairy godmothers who are responsible for his existence. Like that, and you most certainly lead that list. Like that.
I'm not responsible. Wait a second. An agent who says they're responsible for any of that, I disagree. I think that the center of the whole thing is the writer. And the real center is the writer who is a great colleague, who does great work, but then is a great colleague. So I didn't bring anything to life. I did the role that you couldn't do.
I'll agree with that to a certain extent like that, but we could also go back to the Emily Dickinson part where, like, the Walt Longmire novels could have served as insulation, in the walls, like that, if I hadn't found somewhere for them to go.
Yeah. But my experience with series is that the publisher starts modest expectations, a book or two, and maybe 3 or 4. And if the book isn't really performing means this is what they laid out in terms of advance and promotional money and production money. And this is what they got back in terms of, income on book sales. They dropped that series. And we were at a modest level in the beginning. I don't remember at what point you started to develop your mailing list and your fans. We then sold, and I remember feeling very lucky that she went back after 3 or 4 or 5 books to order another. And I'm not sure if we did it by 2s or by 4s or what. Because often they cancel a series, and that shows what I wanted in the first place: investment in a series, investment in a long-term vision. So around book 4 or 5, we sold to TV, which is one of your next questions. And usually they don't make the show. Things just fell into place, and the show was dynamite. So that helped. As you know, it opened up a whole new channel of Longmire fans. And you could talk about, why don't you talk about your frustration that we had a universe of reader fans and we had a universe of television fans. Our goal was to marry everybody off. You talk.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, for me, like that, it's interesting too, like that, because I honestly didn't think, whenever I wrote The Cold Dish, that it was a series, like that it was just a singular standalone book. The way that the Cold Dish ends, it has a very distinctive ending like that. And then I remember, when Catherine came back like that and said, we really, really like these characters. We really, really like this place. We seriously think that this is something that you should consider, maybe doing some more, novels and maybe possibly being in a series. And that's when I, with the knowledge of, not even having had one book published yet, told the president of Penguin USA, yeah, I don't think that's a really good idea. I don't think that'll work like that, but I've got some other ideas I want to bounce off of you. And I remember Catherine, there was a long pause and she said, maybe you should think about this. Maybe you should just sit down there at the ranch, there in Wyoming and just, give this some thought like that, because, and I have to admit also like that for me, it was when I finished the first book, when I finished The Cold Dish, and I'm sure I'm not the first author to have this happen. It was kind of like a mass death. These characters were done. I'd written this novel about them, and now they were finished like that. And after, cutting out, a couple of 100 pages, a lot of the backstories were taken out. A lot of influences like that, that other subplots, were taken out and all of that. I felt as though I had lost these characters, that it was like a mass death. And it really was kind of painful. My wife, Judy, would see me moping around the ranch here as I was doing, some of the chores here around the ranch, seeing me, in this fit of depression, simply because I kind of missed those characters. I really missed Walt, that voice, that he had, and it was not a superhero voice. It was somebody who had gone through some pain in their lives and some difficulties in their lives. A lot of people sometimes will ask me, they'll say, well, what's the biggest differences, between you and Walt? And, obviously the major difference between Walt and I is that I've not had the tragedies in my life, that Walt's had to go through. But I do feel like, that's one of the really, attractive aspects of him, that he's not a superhero, that he's not a comic book character, that he's an individual who's had a lot of difficulty in his life, a lot of problems in his life and things he's had to overcome and continue on with. And I was kind of surprised, whenever, when Catherine and you, came back and said, you might want to think about writing some more of these like that. And so the big question, of course, at that point in time became, okay, well, are there other stories? I mean, that's the thing. It always comes down to, are there other stories, for these characters to involve themselves with? And the answer came roaring back, with Walt and Henry and Vic and Lucian, and all of these characters, that, yeah, they did have other stories that they needed to tell like that. And so I looked at myself and said, well, you dummy, nobody else is going to write them like it. And so if you're seriously thinking about this, then, you're going to have to sit down and knuckle down and really think about what that next book is going to be, like it, which became Death Without Company, like it, and Kindness Goes Unpunished, Another Man's Moccasins, like it. And that basically made the first literary year of Walt's life, and allowed me to continue on, with the idea of doing this as a series. But I mean, that would be one of my questions also, like that though, as far as like, how do you approach, how do you represent an author as far as, a singular book is concerned, but then, what challenges are involved, whenever you've got an author? I mean, here we are, I'm working on the 17th book in the Walt Longmire series. Like I had 2 novellas, a collection of short stories, and we're creeping up on another collection of short stories very rapidly like that. But how do you approach, I mean, I guess, whenever you're going to represent, that much of a body of work that still has, a singular character, that still has a singular universe or world like that, how do you approach, representing that type of thing anyway?
No, wait a minute. You're saying a series is one kind of thing because it's going to go on, and you're asking about a standalone, a book that is not part of a series.
Or how would you approach? Because I mean, that first book, I'm assuming like that when we first did The Cold Dish, that was a standalone book like that. And I mean, you approached
in my mind, the setup of that book was perfect for a series because we have an amazingly interesting central character. He's got access to crimes or, things to investigate, obviously. And the environment was so well presented, and the secondary characters were so close to being almost primary. It was an ensemble book, kind of, because we got him and his daughter, we got Henry, and we got, the good guys, we got the bad guys, we got the police guy on the reservation, and it's sort of like an ensemble, which is probably why the TV worked so well. And that kind of story, when it's a detective or a guy who's a detective-ish solving the thing, it's the setup for a series. So in my mind, that would have been, if it was a standalone, that would have been fun. But are you asking what happens when I have like a nice little domestic novel that I can sell and it doesn't have a series attached to it? Or not? You ask. So I'll tell you. I mean, it's not like you do anything different. You read it, you do your editorial, you fight with the author because they say, no, I don't want to change that. I say sleep on it. They always do what I say. Sometimes they do everything but one thing. This happened to me once. Everything but one thing. We send it to the editor. The editor buys it, fights with her. And what is she fighting about? That one thing. So the writer finally writes me an email to say, Gail, I just want you to know that one thing that stood between us, I have now changed it to the way you asked all along. That's pretty fun. Anyway, so a standalone, you look at books on the bestseller list. Some of them contain ongoing characters and some of them are just simple books. A great single book is great, but we use this phrase, I want to build the author. The company wants to build you. Now, one way to build you is you have one single book that does well and everybody starts to like you and follow your book. You write another single book. I'm telling you, that first novel has all your heart and soul in it. The second book, we talk about sophomore blues. Second book isn't always so great because you're expecting it to be as good or better. How can it be unless the writer is that brilliant and he's got that great an idea, or the texture of the writing is so great? It often isn't. But it's a different job to build the author in that context. Mm-hmm. I have an author who wrote a book that was good for 20-somethings in a city about best friends who are in their 20s. The next book she comes in with such a historic story about her great aunt who was a WAC in World War I or World War II or whatever. It's like, no, we had to send it back. We cannot build an audience when you're writing for one audience and then you're writing for another audience. When you have a series, you are building the author directly. You see, that's our goal, is to build the author, right? So you grew because I invested, my foreign rights gal invested, the publisher invested. In a standalone situation, if your sales numbers are not great on one book, that publisher is probably going to drop you for the next book. And these days, the agent now has to find you a new publisher, right? And sometimes it's not easy. So what do you do that's different? It's easier in a way with a series, but now you're not handling a book, you're handling a world, right? So it's harder. Do you know what I mean? It's bigger.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but
Yep.
it's very direct. So do you see what I'm saying?
I
Nothing's
do.
better than anything, because many times I had a policeman who actually was a policeman who decided to retire and started taking writing classes. He got an MFA somewhere. I sold a series of books from and by a New York City policeman that were dynamite books, but they weren't selling. So after 4 books, they cut it, and I never heard from him again.
Ah. Well, thank goodness that's not what happened with me. But one of the reasons that didn't happen with me is the wonderful success we've had with the books, but also the wonderful success that we've had, with the television show Longmire, which you are kind of responsible for in many ways. And so, would you like to elaborate on that and say how that actually kind of happened?
Well, you want me to take credit for things. It's always the book. But anyway, I had, the film, everybody notices that books that are very successful often become a movie because people want to see that same story in other formats. These days, television or television movies is how it goes. So the film agencies have a department that is called book to film or book to television. So that agency, and that was CAA, represents writers and actresses and actors and songwriters and directors, producers. They represent a million different people, but they also look for material so that those people can make TV shows and make movies. So they have a book to film department. They don't always sell it to their own people, but that's a department. And if they're handling very successful books, it would be a money-making department. I've made, the first very big film deal I made, I think, was $1 million for Presumed Innocent in 1987 or 1988. That was a movie. That was a pretty big deal. It was like a huge deal at the time. Now movies have waned. So anyway, CAA, big corporate film agency, Hollywood agency, sent their book to film people to me. So they were the 1 or 2 guys I already knew, and the more senior guy, in Hollywood, the senior guy's like 23, So the senior guy young, and then there's a younger person they're taking under the wing, and then there was a person that they say she's a genius, she's amazing, she does series. So you always sit in your meetings and you say, what do you want? What are you looking for? Because I might have a new book or an old book. Series is a different story. So they all said what they were looking for, the kind of things that would sell. And she said, we are looking for a great character. Now, at various times they come to my office and they say, okay, network TV wants a great character who's downbeat. This is such a ridiculous conversation. And cable TV wants a great character who's blah, blah. Or they want ensemble, they want communities of character that work together. They'll say what they want. But that time they said, we want a great character. I can't remember. There may have been some other thing she said. So I think I gave them 3 books to look at, to be agents for. And one was yours. One was a small kid's book that was kind of a time travel book. I don't know how that represented this. And there must have been something else with a great character. So they took on 2. And then they get several offers for this because this book contained a great character you cannot take your eyes off of. So CAA called us to say, that gal didn't call a whole lot, we got to say. But she called us to say, I have several offers. And I don't remember if you interviewed the people. Did you kind of have a phone call with them?
I did. With a couple of different ones, yeah.
So she brought us potential buyers. She wasn't going to set you up. Well, long story. If we had several offers in hand, which we did, you had to decide. You had to make your decision based on whatever your factors were. If you were a total idiot with your decision, we would have told you. But I don't think we brought you anything but good choices. And it turned out that the rest was history. So she was in my office. She said what she wanted. I gave her what she wanted. She responded and she sold it. It doesn't happen like that a lot. But that's how that started. It was easy. And she was just starting out there. Or she had done a year or 2. She wasn't overloaded with 50,000 clients. So that was, sometimes we make one call. You've always been interested in X book. I got it free from options. Are you interested now? Years ago, I think Scott Rudin is a very big book buyer. And I had a book that he had been calling and calling and calling. And I was in between. There was something that I had a sliver of time between when he left that studio and he went to a different studio, whatever it was. And I got him to buy it in that sliver of time for that studio, for whatever the reason that was a thing to do. You keep your ears open. These days, it's all television because big features are made, but not, independent people are making big features more than the big studios, you know. And TV is complicated. The TV contract has gotten more and more complicated than it ever was. But so that's how that happened. But then you were involved, so we just had to do the paperwork, you see, and collect the money.
It's always an important part, collecting the money. That's an important.
Yeah, but also, which was it, Sunday night or Monday? Which night was it on when it was the first?
It was on, we started on Sunday nights. We started on Sunday nights.
Make sure Sunday night I was home, because I don't know how to record on my television. Now I do.
Well, if you don't know how it all played out, like that next year when you're here for Longmire Days, you can always ask Robert Taylor to tell you the story of like what happens in the last episode of it, season 6.
I remembered. I watched.
Well, now that brings me to my final question, like that, and here we are doing the virtual Longmire Days, like that, and but you've been a steadfast member, a pillar of society, like that, by being one of our bigger supporters and being there for Longmire Days, for more than a few years, like that, and I just thought that since next year is going to be our 10th anniversary of Longmire Days. With all of the actors, like, and a lot of people are making commitments, like, to being here in Buffalo, Wyoming next year. We're really excited about that. I wondered if you'd like to say a few words, like, about what your experiences in Longmire Days, like, and what it was like for you.
Okay, Longmire Days started small. I think you had a couple of book signings. We didn't even know about it. The next day, the next year, and the next year it built. You didn't say one lousy word about it. So in New York for a publicity meeting, and then you said something like, well, and we do this big, kind of like a convention, kind of like a weekend celebration of the books, and the editor and I looked at each other like, you got to be kidding. We never even heard of it. You didn't even tell us. So I said, Catherine, it was then maybe summer, so thinking ahead to or maybe it was February, I don't remember what it was, thinking ahead to like the next, so far ahead, it was like, really? I said, mark your calendar, we are going. And then I called her 1 month before, buy your tickets, we are going. And that year you set us up to stay in a cabin owned by a family. And I thought, oh, great, beautiful cabin. I'll go outside, wash my face in the brook, meander down the little street of the little town and get some coffee. We were 40 miles away from anything. And they left us deep, and we both have a license, but neither of us really is confident driving. So we were in the middle of nowhere with a couple of cows walking, a couple of horses wandering by, a Jeep. The other family was nice. They dropped us off in town, or you picked us up. So our first experience was every event was, if you haven't been to Longmire Days, every event was wondrous. There's Native American dancing. There's a book signing. There's a panel discussion with the actors. What they do now is the 2 waltz, which is like the most amazing thing. There's tea with Ruby. There's and all kinds of interesting things in the town itself. So here's a town that's all over the saloon, the old hotel where I stay, where David Stewart is the owner and the prime guitar player, and became my friend over these years. You can always go and meet somebody that you didn't know. You have you have a common interest. Some years we overlap with the Bluegrass Festival. Well, what's wrong with bluegrass? I love bluegrass. So the music is different because they bring in some of the bluegrass people. So you say, are you here for Longmire or bluegrass? You meet amazing people. A shy person can just have a nice time. The next year you come back, people have gone online to find a partner. They wanted to go, they didn't want to go alone. They have found a partner that they never knew. And they met in the airport, or they met in Buffalo, and they experienced Longmire Days together. I went horseback riding. I don't think it put me on a horse since I'm like 3 years old for a photo. And then there's a thunderstorm while we're up there in the nowheres. It was quite an experience. You make friends. It is an amazing experience. I love Judy's shop, that's for sure. I'm a mainstay of Judy's shop. I love the craft store, the pottery store that has all kinds of gifts. I buy local, so I go into all the stores and I find stuff that I'm like a nut. I am a major life enthusiast. This one time I even went into the vintage store, like, what's the matter with me? I have like enough. Anyway, it's really one time I got there a day early, I saw the local farmers market. The town has a life that matters to me too. And the people who support Longmire are so interesting. And the events, the first time or two, you're blown away because the enthusiasm is so palpable. And I'm embarrassed because there's fans there who accost me and they say, how come he shot the dog or whatever? How come, what are you talking about? How come he let blah, blah get away? I said, what are you talking about? It's some character. It's something I totally forgot. Well, in book 4, towards the end, blah, blah, blah. It keeps you on your toes.
It does. It does.
And also to see you so gracious, so loving to all of these people who are so, there's a lot of love in the air, and it breaks down every possible barrier. Every possible person could be there. And how many times did I say to somebody early years about the TV show, oh, I love that. Well, how do you like the books? I don't know. There's books, really? I said, let me take you to the books, to the stores, all over every store selling them. Let's take you to the store right now. So 10th anniversary.
I know. Pretty amazing. Like it's kind of a unique situation like that. I think there was I think it was a Twilight Festival that used to be up in Washington State like that. And, but there aren't very many festivals like that are out there that kind of like celebrate a series of books and a television show like that, and I think Buffalo really puts its best foot forward like that whenever it does Longmire Days. It's really kind of a wondrous thing to have happen. And for me, it's also kind of nice like that because, I've written, 17 novels, 2 novellas, and a collection of short stories about this place. There's some small changes that I've made and little things, mostly just scaling it down so that Waltstown is a little bit smaller. Buffalo's actually gotten a little bit too big in many ways like that. But it's kind of a wondrous thing to have happen and people to be able to wander around and be able to go up to the Jim Gatchell Museum, the old Carnegie Library that's actually Walt's office, to go down and have breakfast at the Busy Bee Cafe there at the Occidental Hotel, like or walk down to the Sports Lure or across the street over to Hughes, like to the Hitching Post Gallery, and all these places, Margot's Pottery, and all these things that kind of make it a very special kind of event, I have to admit.
Do you think that Longmire Days helped grow the town?
Oh, I don't know. I would hope that was the case. I would hope that everything that we've done and all of the work that we put into it and everything has been beneficial to the town. Like that, I would think that, whenever you talk to the business owners and the hotel owners and the restaurant owners, they're pretty positive. Like that it's a wonderful thing to have happen on a yearly basis. Like especially to a little town of about 4,000 people, in northern Wyoming. The economic situation, nationally, like that is, kind of a tough situation like that. And so I think when Longmire Days comes roaring back, for our 10th anniversary next year, it'll be all for the better. We're kind of running into the end of our time here. And I've taken so much of your time, and you've been so gracious, Gail. I appreciate it so much.
Are you kidding? Otherwise, I'd have to look at contracts.
Or go read manuscripts or something like that. Oh my goodness.
Read manuscripts off hours.
Well, I know that I land one on your desk at least once a year.
Yes. Miss you so much. So I send so much guys.
Well, so good to see you. And I think your hair looks fantastic. I think that your hair looks particularly wonderful.
Oh my God.
I'm just glad I wear a hat in these pandemic days So and all the other times. Gail, thank you so much for helping us. And thank you so much for being such a magnificent part of Talking Books here in the virtual Longmire Days. And thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye, you guys.